Good day there viewers, my name is Cliff and welcome to my channel called Vintage Time. Today you'll see me cut a piece of smoky quartz that I actually found in the township of El Dorado. Now El Dorado is a gold mining town and it is located in the southern part of Australia in the state of Victoria. Now behind the township there's a creek called Reedy Creek. This is where the gold was mined. It's also a favourite place for fossickers to frequent and find smoky quartz, citrine and topaz. So here's an example of a piece of citrine that I found a couple of days ago on the creek bed, and this should cut quite a nice stone. As you can see, here's a piece of smoky quartz I'll be faceting today, and being tumbled makes it quite easy to see through the stone, so it's quite evident there's no inclusions in it. So this is the preformed stage of gem cutting. Here I'm just grinding the stone by hand on a 240 grit disc, and I'm rounding out the sides known as the girdle. Later on I'll just smooth out the top, which becomes a table, and that's where the dop will be glued onto. Here's a completed preform, as you can see, ready to be glued onto the dop stick. I've marked out a circle in the centre as the centre point for the dop. The stone has been placed into the transfer jig and the dop has been glued onto the table now. Below the stone I've used blue tack just to seat the stone so it won't move around. So now the fun begins, where we actually start grinding the stone. So this is the process where I actually lay the stone out at a 90-degree angle so I can round out the girdle, and this is done on a 240 grit disc. So the rounding out of the girdle has taken place, and I've gone in the sequence from a 240 grit disc to an 800 and then onto a 3000 to make sure everything's properly smoothed out. Now I'm cutting the first set of pavilion facets on a 240 grit disc, lifting the stone off the disc to change the index wheel rotation, cutting the next facet in order. Now you'll see the first set of pavilion facets cut to a qulet on a 240 grit disc. Now I'll move on to an 800 disc to just smooth things out more. So the first set of pavilion facets have been completed, starting off with the 240 grit disc, then moving on to an 800 grit disc, and then onto the final pre-polish, which was the 3000 grit disc. Sometimes I can just finish off on the 800 grit disc because usually that will polish up pretty well also. Onto the next stage. Now I'm cutting the next couple of tiers of pavilion facets. Being a Portuguese cut, this could be probably 4 to 5 tiers of facets. So I'm repeating the same process before, using a 240 grit onto an 800, then onto a 3000 grit disc. So you can see the result here by cutting the next section of the tiers on the Portuguese cut. The facets are quite small, so later on this will need polishing. So here you see that all the facets have been cut on the pavilion. The facets haven't been quite cut to a meat point, although you can't see it with the eye, but under a loop I've allowed a little bit of room as to allow the polish to cut to meat points. Before I start polishing, I prepare the lap by cleaning it with WD-40 on a tissue. This wipes off all the residue, as you can see here. Then I rub my finger on the lap and apply 50,000 grit diamond dust and start charging it. So now I'm ready to start polishing, so I set the protractor at around 89.5 degrees and start polishing the girdle facets. So here you can see I've polished the pavilion and girdle facets, and to save time I've edited the clips in some sort of sequential order. Now many facetters won't polish the girdle facets, as this saves time and also avoids chipping the stone, but the facets on the girdle are facets in their own right, and I think visually the gem looks a lot better when the facets on the girdle have been polished. So I'm beginning the process of cutting the crown using a 240 grit disc. I've done the same process as before, where I've had to put the stone in a transfer jig and glue it, and now I've had to reset it into the quill and just continue cutting all the facets required. So I've roughed out the crown facets using a 240 grit disc, and then I move on to the 800 and 3000 grit discs. And this is the most critical part of cutting any gem, is getting a nice even girdle. So the next step is I need to cut the next tier of crown facets. So I adjust for height adjuster on the mast, and then I'm going to adjust the angle on the protractor, which will be about 45 degrees, and I'll have the stone barely touching the disc. So then I'm set to go. So what you see here is that I'm cutting the second tier of crown facets on this Portuguese cut on a 240 grit disc. And you'll notice in a moment that I actually haven't cut down to the next group of meat facets on the first tier. So I'm about a couple of mil shy of that, and the reason being is that I'm going to be using an 800 grit disc in a moment, and then a 3000. And so I'll cut down almost to the next set of meat points, but I'll be just short of that because I want to polish them in. So here you see all the completed facets on the pavilion, and the last facet I'll cut will be the table facet. So at this point I've removed the stone out of the quill, and I'll begin cutting the table. Now I'm cutting the table using a 3000 grit disc, and you'll notice that I'm using a special adapter that's inserted into the quill. I'm using a 3000 grit just to save a bit of time. So here you can see that the actual table has been cut using that 3000 grit disc, and the next step now will be polishing that table, which is quite critical because polishing the table, being a big facet, usually always takes quite a bit of time. And here you can see that the table has been polished, and the hardest part about polishing the table, you usually get little white patches in the centre that quite often can be difficult to remove. So to save time, I've edited all the sequences in polishing the crown, and it's the same process as polishing the pavilion using tin lap with the 50,000 diamond grit, and you just move through all the tiers of the facets till we get down to the bottom where the girdle is. Now this is a difficult step when polishing the crown because as more light passes through the facets, as the stone gets clearer, it's harder to spot all those milky patches. Now for a final weigh in, and we have 14.5 carats. So the gem is completed now. It's a smoky quartz in the style of a Portuguese cut. Before I finish up, I'd like to thank all my subscribers for supporting me and my channel. Just let me know if you'd like me to make more videos in the narration style, as all the previous videos were titles and credits. So sit back and enjoy the rest of the video and listen to the music. And it's over and out from me. Have a nice day everybody. Take care.